Language is extremely fascinating. It truly is the basis for how we perceive the world around us. Knowing more than one language can give you access to different perspectives. This is because a word with a single meaning in English could possibly be translated into a word that has multiple meanings in another language. And sometimes you get words that can't even be translated at all. But something so important must have somebody who controls it, owns it, right? So let's look at English, easily one of the most influential languages on Earth, but also one of the most influenced. Who owns English? Well, right off the bat, if you didn't say nobody, you probably thought of England or Great Britain in general. This is obviously the place of origin for English, but the language itself is a result of the unique mixing of French, Latin, and Germanic vocabularies for the most part. And after centuries of mixing, they would eventually harmonize into what is now known as English. But if we were to compare English of England today to the English of England 400 years ago, around the time it was colonizing the Americas and leaving the island, we can see some interesting differences. So here's some context. In recent times, there has been a large push for Shakespeare's plays to be done in what is known as OP, original pronunciation. Before the 1800s, English didn't have a true expected standard in terms of spelling, unlike we have today. People spoke how they wrote, and expert linguists, such as David Crystal, have been able to use this to their advantage, as well as looking at how people rhyme certain words with one another and actual testimonies from that era. They've been able to actually decipher and put together actual pronunciations, organizing an actual accent for how people would have sounded back in that era. For example, we know through testimony that the word war once rhymed with the word star, being pronounced war. Here is David Crystal and his son both reciting a part of Henry V by Shakespeare, with his son speaking in his normal accent and David speaking in OP.
Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention.
Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention.
A kingdom for a stage, princes to act and monarchs to behold the swelling scene.
A kingdom for a stage, princes to act and monarchs to behold the swelling scene.
Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars.
Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars.
And at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword and fire crouch for employment.
And at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword and fire crouch for employment.
Now it should be noted, just like how there are numerous accents in the UK today, there would have been back in Shakespeare's time as well. Even looking at the Queen's English, typically upheld as the standard English accent in Great Britain, and the stereotypical posh-sounding one, it is known to be only about 200 or so years old. And as mentioned, we have England about 400 years ago sending its own native people whose ancestors took just as much part in the development of the English language as the people who stayed on the island, leave in order to establish colonies in the Americas and later different parts of the world. These people would obviously take their dialects with them, and through isolation, both their dialect and the dialect that was in Great Britain would further develop independently from each other. But arguing whether one is more correct than the other would be like arguing which of these two birds which evolved from this one bird is the one bird. The issue is neither of them are the original, and geography doesn't dictate that claim, any more than geography, the place of origin, dictates the development of inventions like the computer, the car, or the phone. That said, it is still important to give credit where credit is due. England and later Great Britain are undoubtedly the reason why English is so successful and widespread today, planting its seeds across the world by providing a language that offered opportunities, insight, and enjoyment, all in what would become the biggest empire the world has ever seen. And this also made possible for people all around the world to contribute their own culture and language to the English language, expanding its vocabulary. Places like India, North America, and Oceania. And as the British Empire came to a close, the torch of a world superpower was passed on to the United States. A nation that would go on to become an economic, political, and cultural powerhouse, having an extremely powerful impact on the English language. Going on to further provide importance to English through the opportunities, entertainment, and insight it could provide. When it comes to true differences between Great Britain and the United States' English, their rules are just about all the same with exception to a few words that are spelled differently. And from there you have some cultural differences in terms of word usage and pronunciation. But that gap has been slowly closing due to the advent of massive cultural exchanges through pop culture, the internet, and many other means of connection. Hearing each other talk is no longer a taboo experience, and we are arguably in another stage of harmonization. And that's all that English has ever done, harmonizing itself into existence and further harmonizing itself to make it more diverse and relevant. So what does all of this mean? If Great Britain doesn't own English and the United States doesn't own English, who owns English? Well, believe it or not, the answer is pretty simple. You. You as an individual who knows English and uses English. People who are willing to learn a language and contribute to its usage and development are the people who take part in owning it. When it came to Great Britain, it was about going out in the world and finding new people to speak the language. And when it came to the United States, it was about people from all around the world coming to it and contributing their own languages to English. Two opposite situations incorporating the entire world, influencing each other. And with thousands of new words being added every year, not just from English speakers, English is continuing to get bigger and more diverse. To assume that anybody owns English is to assume that they control and approve every bit of development that the language goes through. And by the very nature of language, that's not how it works. We are not made for a language, and we should never limit our ability to express our ideas, thoughts, and culture if the words don't exist or are not practical. It's English's ability to be flexible that has made it very adaptable around the world. So whether you're from Great Britain, the United States, Jamaica, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, or whether you're from Germany, Netherlands, Philippines, China, India, Sweden, Mexico, wherever you are in the world, if you know English, you take part in owning it. Even though our influence on English may be minute, we all take part in its progression. And through that we influence its development just as happened throughout the ages, since its origin. And being that we now live in a world where there are 3, potentially 4 times as many non-native English speakers as native English speakers, we have to realize that they will have a big impact on the language. The United States currently has the largest single body of English speakers, but in the coming decades, India and China are both expected to bypass the United States, potentially even doubling the amount it currently has. And I'm interested to see what will happen in this coming century, as the population of English speakers is rapidly increasing, how all of them, you, will impact the English language that we all own a little bit of. So, my question for you guys is, what is something you think the English language should have a word for, and/or what is a word you know from another language that doesn't translate into English well? And with all that said and done, my name's Dale, this is Think Fact, and remember, never stop learning. Thank you for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It really helps out my channel. If you like what you see, please subscribe, and feel free to check out some of my other videos if you missed any. You may just learn something you never knew.